In the previous lecture, we learned what the Tor network is, how it works, and how it's supposed to protect our privacy and anonymity. We also learned how to connect to this network using the Tor browser. So we learned how to properly install it and configure it, and then use it to connect to the network so that we can access websites privately and even access Tor hidden services or onion services, or what most people refer to as the darknet. Now, this is a very easy and simple method, and it's great if you just want to access a website quickly, privately, or if you just want to have a quick look over the darknet. But it's not the best method. The reason for this is because we installed the Tor browser in a normal operating system, such as Windows, Linux, or OS X. These operating systems regularly collect data about the user, about you, to improve user experience, and who knows, maybe for other reasons. Not only that, but most of these operating systems have other programs installed on them which also collect data about you, again, to improve user experience and maybe for other reasons. Now, all of this collected data can be used to de-anonymize you and profile you. Not only that, but all of these programs, all of the programs outside the Tor browser itself access the internet directly. They do not use the Tor network. The only program that is using the Tor network is the Tor browser. Therefore, when these programs leak information about you, they are leaking also your proper exact location. Not only that, but we also have issues such as DNS leaks, which also would leak information about you. And not to mention that all of these programs and operating systems have a history of being vulnerable to code execution and buffer overflow vulnerabilities. Now, these vulnerabilities can be used to gain full control over your computer. And obviously, when someone has control over your computer, knowing where you are or getting information about you is very, very simple. Therefore, in this section, I want to show you a much better method to protect our anonymity and privacy. This method is a little bit more complex and will require a little bit more work and a little bit more hardware, but don't worry about it. I'm going to break it into very simple lectures and I'm going to walk you through the steps one by one, and you're going to learn exactly how it's going to work and why it's so much better than just installing the Tor browser on a normal operating system. So in this section, I'm going to show you a better method to improve our anonymity and privacy and to access the darknet. We're going to use an operating system designed to protect our anonymity and privacy. You probably already heard of this. It's called Tails, and it stands for the Incognito Amnesic Live operating system. It's a Linux-based operating system, and what they mean by live is that you install it on a USB stick or on a DVD, and then you can start it, you can boot it in any computer you want, regardless of what operating system installed on that computer. So it doesn't matter if that computer runs Windows, Linux, OS X. All you need is your USB stick with Tails on it. You stick it in, you boot from it, and you can use Tails from there. The really cool thing about Tails, which is where the Incognito comes from, is the fact that all traffic sent from it will go through the Tor network. So not only browsing traffic, not only messaging traffic, anything you do on that system or any program you even install on that system will have to use the Tor network for its traffic. Therefore, it eliminates the fear or the risks of other programs leaking data. Tails also never touches the storage of your computer other than the RAM. So it completely runs using the RAM, which gets cleared once you restart or shut down your computer. Therefore, it leaves no traces on the used computer. And this is where the word amnesic comes from. This means that you can use any computer to use Tails, and once done, there will be no traces of what you did on that computer. So let's say, for argument's sake, you use Tails, which already routes all traffic through the Tor network, but somehow someone managed to identify where you are and de-anonymize you, and they come and they use your computer and they inspect that computer to see what you did on it. If you turn off that computer, there will be no traces of what you did on that computer. Not only that, but there will even be no traces of Tails on that computer. So it'll seem as if you did not even run Tails on that computer. So that's why Tails is really cool, because first of all, it's live. Once we have it installed on a USB stick or on a DVD, we can use it from any computer we want. Second, it's incognito, so all traffic sent from Tails will always go through the Tor network. Second, it's incognito, it's private, so anything we do on a Tails system using any program will always go through the Tor network. And finally, it leaves no traces, so once we turn off that computer, if the computer gets inspected, there will be no traces of what we did, and there will even be no traces that Tails was even used on that computer. So, throughout this section, we're going to learn how to properly configure Tails, install it, and use it to access websites privately and anonymously, and access the darknet. Now, we have a number of options when it comes to installing Tails. The easiest is to install it as a virtual machine. With this option, you're going to first of all install a virtualization software such as VirtualBox or VMware inside your current operating system, whether it's Linux, Windows, or OS X. And then you'll install Tails as a virtual machine using this virtualization software. So you won't have to restart, you won't have to reboot in order to start Tails. You'll be able to start it within your operating system, within Windows or Linux or OS X, and you won't need a USB stick or a DVD to start it. The problems with this is Tails will lose most of its benefits when it's installed like this, because like I said, Tails is designed to be a live operating system. One of the main advantages of it is the fact that it's amnesic, so when you use it on a computer and turn off that computer, it leaves no traces. So even if that computer is inspected, they won't even know that this computer was used to run Tails. When Tails is installed as a virtual machine, it's going to share the resources with your host operating system, with Windows, Linux, or OS X. This means that it will leave traces of it being used. You also won't be able to have a USB stick that you can use on any computer. You'll only be able to use Tails within that computer that you installed the virtual machine on. And because Tails is installed on Windows, Linux, or OS X, like we said before, these operating systems collect data about you. Not only that, they also have a number of programs that collect data about you. All of these programs access the internet directly, not through the Tor network. And all of these programs and operating systems could be vulnerable to code execution or buffer overflows, which can be used to hack into your computer and again from there de-anonymize you. Therefore, installing Tails as a virtual machine is not great because it will basically lose a lot of its advantages and a lot of its great features. The second option, which is better, is to install Tails on a DVD and then use that DVD to boot Tails. So you can use that DVD on any computer regardless of what operating system it runs. All you have to do is just put the DVD in, restart the computer, boot from the DVD, and then you'll be able to use Tails. Now with this, Tails will come with all of its great features. So it'll be live, it'll leave no traces, and it'll be running natively, so it won't be sharing resources. Therefore, you won't really need to worry about leaks or about other programs collecting data or any of the other stuff that we have to take in consideration when we're running the Tor browser or when we're running Tails as a virtual machine. The only disadvantage to this method is the size of the DVD. It's a little bit big, and the installation of Tails will not be persistent. What I mean by that is, if you store any files while you're using Tails, you will lose them once you turn off the computer or restart it. The third option, which is the best in my opinion, is using a USB stick. So this comes with all of the benefits of the DVD. We're going to install Tails on a USB stick, and then all you'll have to do is connect that USB stick to any computer, regardless of what operating system it runs. Restart that computer, and you'll be able to boot into Tails. Tails will run in its live mode. Again, it won't use any resources. If you turn off that computer, there will be no traces on that computer. And we can also configure this installation to be persistent. This means that we can actually use part of the USB storage as storage for Tails. So you can actually save files within your current installation, within the USB stick, and when you turn off the computer, there'll still be no traces. But even if you go and connect this USB stick to a completely new computer, you will still have your files, you'll be able to boot Tails again and use it normally, and that way you'll have an operating system installed on a really small storage device that you can boot on any computer in the world, regardless of what operating system it runs, and you'll be able to store files. And once you turn off that operating system, once you turn off that computer, there will be no traces on the computer. So even if it gets inspected, there will be no traces of it even running Tails. So you probably guessed by now, installing Tails on a USB stick is the best option. And in the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to do that.
Okay. So now that we understand what Tails is and how it works, in this lecture I want to show you how to install Tails on a USB stick so that we can start Tails on any computer that runs any operating system using this USB stick. Now the instructions that I'm going to show you will work on Windows, Linux, and OS X using the exact same programs and using the exact same steps that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to be doing these steps from a Windows computer, but these steps will work exactly the same from Linux and OS X. If you follow them and you faced any problems, please ask us in the Q&A section and we'll respond to you within 15 hours. So, in order to install Tails on a USB stick, obviously the first requirement is you'll need a USB stick. Now this USB stick needs to have a minimum size of 8 GB. The next thing that we'll need is the Tails image. I'm going to include its download link in the resources of this lecture. And finally, you'll need software to flash the Tails USB image to the USB stick in order to have a bootable USB stick with Tails on it. And once we have that, we'll be able to connect that to any computer that runs any operating system and run Tails from that computer. Now the software that we're going to use to flash Tails to the USB stick is called Etcher. And again, I'm going to include its download link in the resources of this lecture. And this application works on Linux, OS X, and Windows. So all you'll have to do is literally just go to the download page right here, and it'll actually automatically detect what operating system you're running. So as you can see right now, it's automatically telling me I'm running Windows. And if I click here, it'll download the Windows version for me. If it's not detecting the right version for you, you can click on this little arrow right here and just download the Etcher version that is compatible with your operating system. Now I already have that downloaded in here, as you can see. So the next thing that I need is the Tails image. And again, as you can see in here, I have it, and I'm going to include its download link. I know right here it says installed from Windows, but like I said, the steps that I'm going to show you will work on all operating systems. So ignore this, click on the download in here. Once you do, it'll download it for you. And as you can see, I have it right here in my downloads as well. It should be a file with a .img extension, as you can see here. Once you have these two ready, the last thing that you'll need is the USB stick that you'll flash the Tails image to. And I already have my USB stick connected to my Windows computer. As you can see, I have it in here. It has 28 gigabytes free, but like I said, you only need a minimum of 8 gigabytes. So what we want to do right now is we're going to use this application, Etcher, to flash this Tails image to this USB stick. So the first thing that we'll need to do is to install this application. So I'm going to double click it and we're going to agree. And it's a very simple installer. As you can see, it finished installing and it automatically started the application for me. Now the installation of this on Windows and OS X is literally as simple as this. All you'll have to do is download it, double click it, and you'll get this window right here. Now, just before I use this, just to show you, if the installer didn't run the program for you automatically, you should have the icon of it right here on the desktop. All you'll have to do is double click it and it'll start the application for you. Now, using the application is very simple. As you can see, all you'll have to do is first of all select the image that you want to flash to your USB. And like I said, the image for me is this one right here, the one in the downloads. So I'm going to click on select image. And I'm already in my downloads directory, as you can see in here. So I'm just going to click on this image and click on open. We can see it's selected in here. The next thing that you'd want to do is select the USB device that you want to flash the image to. As you can see, it automatically selected my drive E, my device E, which is the device that I have right here. Like I said, this is the correct one. In your case, if this wasn't the correct one, all you'll have to do is just click on change and select the one that you want to flash Tails to. So in my case, this is all perfect. And all I need to do right now is just click on flash to flash the image to the USB stick. But before I do that, I want to verify the integrity of the image that I downloaded. So I want to make sure that this image did not get modified as I downloaded it. And I actually explained how this could happen, how it could get modified as it gets downloaded in the previous section. So if you don't remember that, go back and revise that section. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to verify that this image did not get modified. So I'm going to go back to Firefox. Again, we're still at the download page of Tails. I'm just going to click on I already have it downloaded because I do have it downloaded. And in order to verify the integrity of the image that we downloaded, we're going to use an extension provided to us by the Tails developers. And to install that, all we have to do is just click in here, install Tails verification extension. I'm going to say yes, I want to allow that. And I want to add it to my browser. We're going to say OK. And to use this, all we'll have to do is just click on Verify Tails in here. It's going to ask us to select the image that we downloaded. Again, you want to make sure you go to your downloads and select the image that you downloaded. We're going to click on Open. And it's going to check the integrity of the image for us right now. And perfect. As you can see, it's telling us that the verification is successful. So the image is valid. It did not get modified as we downloaded it. And now we should feel safe flashing it to our USB device so we can use it to boot into Tails and use Tails safely in the future. So, as we seen before, I've already selected the image. I've already selected my USB device that I want to flash Tails to. I'm going to click on Flash to start the flashing process. I'm going to say yes, that's no problem. I give permissions. And right now, you just want to give it its time to flash the image, verify it, and once done, it's going to show us a notification saying the process is finished. Now, like I said, all the steps that I've done so far are identical on all operating systems on Windows, Linux, and OS X. Follow them exactly like I showed you right here. Ignore the fact that it says Windows in this page, and everything will work exactly as I'm showing you. And perfect, as you can see, it's telling us flash is complete, one successful device, so everything is done with no errors. And right now, Tails is installed on my USB device that is connected to my Windows machine. So right now I can unplug it from this machine and connect it to any computer regardless of what operating system it runs on, and I'll be able to use Tails from that computer without leaving any traces on it. And I'll show you how to do that in the next lecture. So now that we have Tails installed on a USB stick, we can use this USB stick to boot into Tails from any computer, regardless of what operating system that computer runs. Whether it runs Windows, Linux, or OS X, it doesn't really matter. All we'll have to do is connect the USB device that we installed Tails to the computer that we want to run Tails on, start the computer or restart it if it's already running. Then, as it starts, before it even gets into the loading page of Windows or OS X, as soon as it starts, you want to enter the boot menu. Now this varies depending on the computer that you have. So you'll have to press a button or maybe a combination of buttons in order to enter the boot menu, and this will differ depending on your computer. So here I have a list of the most common brands and the corresponding keys that will allow you to enter the boot menu. For example, if you have an Acer, you should try to press Escape, F12 or F9. So what you do is you connect your USB device to the computer, you start the computer or restart it if it's already running, then keep pressing the Escape button multiple times until you see a boot menu like this one or similar to this one. If you don't see it, if you boot into the default operating system that your computer usually boots in, then you should restart and try the next option in the list. If you tried all of the options and it still doesn't work, then check out the links in the resources of this lecture on more info on how to boot into Tails. And if you can't find any help, then ask us in the Q&A section and we'll respond to you within 15 hours. Once you enter the boot menu, you want to select the option that will allow you to boot from a USB or an external storage. Hit enter, and you'll see the Tails boot menu as you can see in here. You want to keep this at the first option and hit enter. This will start booting Tails from the USB device that you connected, so give it some time to start the operating system for you. Perfect, so as you can see, we have the welcome window of Tails, and if you want to start straight away, all you have to do is just click on Start Tails. But before doing that, let's take a quick look on the options that we can modify in here. So first of all, you can modify the language, which is set to English United States by default, and I'm going to keep it that way. The keyboard is also set to English US. Now you might want to modify this if you have a different layout, but I think it's a good idea to keep it at the default settings because that'll give even less info. Now I know I said that Tails won't leave any traces, but I just like to keep things to the default in here. Again, we have the calendar format. I'm going to keep that to the default. And at the bottom here, we have additional settings or advanced settings. So I'm going to click on the plus to show you the settings that you can set here. And the first thing that you can set is an administration password. So by default, Tails disables the admin account. So as you can see, it's set to off. So when you go and use the operating system, there will be no admin. The reason it's configured this way, so that if someone manages to hack into your system, they won't have admin permissions, so they won't be able to change core functions or core settings within the operating system, and they also won't be able to install any applications. If for some reason you needed to modify something that requires admin settings, or if you wanted to install programs on the system, then you can enable the admin account from here. You can click on this and you set a password, you repeat the password and click on add to add it. Keep in mind that this account will only be added for this current session. once you restart the computer, the admin account will disappear along with all the modifications that you make to Tails, because like we said, Tails is a live amnesic operating system that completely wipes everything that you do every time you restart the computer. So when you create an admin account in here and log in, this admin account will disappear and will not even exist once you restart the computer. So if you want to use an admin account again, the next time you use the system, you're gonna have to come to this menu and create it. But for now, I don't really want to do anything that requires admin privileges, and I don't want to install any programs. So I'm gonna click on back and I'm gonna keep this to off. The next setting that you might want to modify is the Mac spoofing. And as you can see, this is set to on by default. Now, MAC address is a unique and permanent address that is assigned to every network device. It gets assigned to it at the time the device is manufactured, and it never changes. So for example, if I have an Ethernet card or a Wi-Fi card and unplug it from my computer and connect it to a completely different computer, that card will still have the same MAC address. Now, this MAC address is only visible within your network. It's not visible on the internet. As we know, Tails automatically routes all internet traffic through Tor, so we're not really concerned about stuff that happens on the internet. It should hide our identity automatically. But within the network, the MAC address is visible, and the MAC address is unique and permanent, like I said, and therefore it can be used to identify you. So this option by default is set to on, and I'm going to keep it to on so that Tails will also change my MAC address every time I start it. Therefore, my MAC address will be changed, so I'll be hidden or anonymous within the network, and when I connect to the internet, all the traffic will automatically go through the Tor network, and therefore it will improve my anonymity. The only time you might want to set this to off is if the network that you're connecting to uses a whitelist. So if it only allows specific MAC addresses to connect to it, and if your MAC address is one of these whitelisted MAC addresses, that's the only time that you might want to set this to off. Otherwise, it's better to keep it at on so your identity is hidden within your network. Now, the third option here, the network connection, and this is set to direct, the default. Like I said, this means that all traffic sent from any application on Tails will have to go through the Tor network. So this is perfect. But if we click on it, you'll also see we have two other options. The second option is to configure a Tor bridge or a proxy, and we already discussed what bridges, pluggable transports, and proxies are previously in the course. We discussed how to get them and why you might want to use them. So I'm not going to really talk about it right now. If you don't remember what they are, please go back and revise the previous section. I will, however, show you how to use a bridge or a pluggable transport with Tails, because we only covered how to do it with Tor browser. So I'll show you how to do this with Tails in a future lecture. For now, we're keeping this to the default. Obviously, the third option here will disable all networking. We don't want to this right now. So we're keeping everything here to the default, and I'm going to click on cancel. And we're back to the welcome menu, in which we can just shut down or start Tails. So now that we're happy with all of these settings, I'm going to click on Start Tails to start the operating system. And perfect, as you can see, we get a nice and simple desktop. I know it might look strange to you, especially if you're used to Windows, but don't worry, it's actually very simple to use. And it's very similar to a lot of operating systems, even though it looks a little bit different. In the next lecture, we'll have a basic overview on this operating system, its menus, how to use it, how to interact with it, just so that we get more comfortable with using it. Right, so now that we have Tails installed and we learned how to boot into it, in this lecture, I want to give you a basic overview on this operating system. So first of all, on the top here, we have the status bar. On the top left, we have the applications menu, which contains a number of applications categorized nicely in terms of what they can be used for. In the favorites, you have your programs that you'll probably be using most of the time. We have the Tor browser, which we already know what it is and what it can be used for. We have Thunderbird, which is an email client. We have Pigeon, which is an instant messenger that can be configured to not keep any traces of you. We have a password manager, and we have a terminal, which we can use to run Linux commands. You can actually go through all of these and get familiar with all of the offered programs. On the internet here, again, we have some of the programs that I just showed you. We also have Electrum, which is a Bitcoin wallet. You have Office programs, LibreOffice, that you can use instead of Microsoft Office Word. You have media programs and all the usual stuff that you see on different operating systems. Now, don't worry about all of the strange programs that you don't know in here. We will be using a lot of them as we go through the course. So right now, I'm just giving you a basic overview of the whole operating system. That's why I'm not going to be running any of them. Beside the applications, we have the Places menu, which will allow you to access different folders in your file system. So as you can see, if we click on the home, we will actually get a file manager in the home directory, as you can see in here. You'll get to this exact location if you just double click the home icon in here. So again, as you can see here, we have a number of files similar to what you get with Windows. So we have documents, downloads, music, pictures, and so on. Again, you can access each of these directories individually by going to Places and just clicking on the directory that you want to access. Now, it goes without saying, you can also navigate to this through this menu. You can double click a directory to open it and double click a file to execute it or to open it with its default program. Right click to create new directories, to copy and paste, to get properties. So it's all intuitive and it's all very, very similar to what you get with other operating systems. Now, another really cool feature with Tails is the fact that it supports multiple desktops. So right now we have a workspace right here, and let's say this workspace gets cluttered with a lot of applications, a lot of open windows. So let's open another window, for example, on Documents, and let's say you also have a browser and you want to do more stuff. Then you can actually press Ctrl, Alt, and down to go to a new workspace. And right here I have an empty workspace which I can do more work in. So again, I can go to Places and open something else here. And I can do some work. For example, I can have my web browser in here and then Ctrl Alt up to go to the first workspace, this one with the windows already open in here. Not only that, but you can also press the Windows button or the left command and S on OS X. This will reveal the activity menu, which will first of all show you the open windows in the current workspace. It will also show you the available workspaces here on the right. So I can click in here to go to the second workspace where I had my music open. Again, click on this one to go to the first one, and then click on the last one to go to the last workspace. So instead of pressing Ctrl Alt up and down, you can navigate through the workspaces like this, and also you can see the running applications. Not only that, but you can also see your favorite applications in here in a nice dock on the left. And you can press on this icon right here to get a list of all the applications installed on Tails. So right here we have all of the other applications that we were navigating to through the applications menu. And if you can't find your application here, or if you want to access it quickly, you can literally just type its name using the keyboard. So if I just type Tor, it will bring me all of the applications that have the word Tor in them. So this is really, really handy. Again, this is the activity view, and you can access this by pressing the Windows button on Windows computers or the right CMD and S on OS X computers. I'm going to press Escape to exit this. And we're back at the main desktop. Now, I think this is enough for this lecture. In the next lecture, I'll continue covering the basics of Tails. I'll show you how to see the notifications, how to edit the preferences, how to connect to networks, and so on. Okay, so we're going to pick up from where we left in the previous lecture. And in this lecture, I'm going to continue showing you the basics of Tails, how to see the notifications, how to edit some of the settings, connect to networks, and so on. And going back to the status bar, we have the time and the date in here. Now, if you also click on this, you'll get a nice calendar on the right, and you'll also get the notification menu in here, in which you'll see a list of system notifications. Continuing to the right, we have the onion icon right here, which shows us the status of the Tor circuit. Now, if you're not connected right now, you should see an X beside it. Don't worry about that. We'll talk about this in a minute. Beside it, you have the accessibility options. Again, options to zoom in, zoom out, increase contrast, stuff that will just make it easier to use the system. We have the language selector in here. You can change the language if you wanted to. You can click on show keyboard layouts if you wanted to add more languages. Now going to the last icon in here, you can see the first thing we have is the volume controls. You can also see it saying wired connected. This is because I have an Ethernet cable connected to this computer. That's why how this computer is getting internet connection. This is the easiest way to get internet connection on Tails. If you don't have an Ethernet cable, you can also connect using Wi-Fi. Now keep in mind, you'll only see this option, the Wi-Fi option, if Tails supports your Wi-Fi card or if it supports the wireless adapter that is connected to this computer. For example, it actually was not able to detect my built-in Wi-Fi card. And the only reason why I have this option here, because I have an external USB wireless adapter connected to this computer. So if you can't see the Wi-Fi option here, it's probably because the Wi-Fi card used in your computer is not supported by Tails. I'll include a list of all Wi-Fi adapters supported by Tails in the resources of this lecture. Once you see this option, connecting to a Wi-Fi network is trivial. All you have to do is just click here, click on select network, select the network that you want to connect to, put the password, and you'll be able to connect. And finally, you can also see the power settings in here of this computer. At the bottom here, we have a number of icons. The first one here will take you into the preferences. So I'll just click on it quickly to show you. In here, you'll be able to change settings about the operating system, such as the background, display, privacy settings, language settings, and so on. Keep in mind, right now our installation is not persistent, so anything you do will be lost as soon as you turn off this machine or restart it. We will talk about persistence later on in the course, so you should keep this in mind when changing settings. Going back to the top right icon, we also have the lock icon in here, which will lock this computer. Now, keep in mind, we started this session without a password. Remember, the admin password was disabled. Therefore, when you click on this, it'll actually ask you for a password to set so that you can use that password to unlock the screen again. So let's say I put a password here and then lock the screen. Now, when I come back, hit enter, and to log in now to my session, I'll have to use the password that I just set. Keep in mind, this is not an admin password. This is literally a password that we temporarily set when we lock the screen. You can also pause the current session. You can restart or shut down using these buttons. Now, the really cool thing about Tails, when you click on shutdown or when you just disconnect the USB device that contains Tails, it will automatically shut down securely. What I mean by that is, as we mentioned before, Tails never uses the built-in storage of the computer that you run it on. It runs completely from RAM. This means that once you turn it off, it leaves no traces because RAM gets cleared every time you turn off the computer or restart it. Now, this is all good, but it actually takes a number of minutes, sometimes even up to 4 or 5 minutes, to completely clear the RAM. Therefore, if you just shut down the computer and someone grabs your computer, freezes the RAM, this RAM will still contain information about your session, and that way they'll be able to store your RAM for a long period of time as long as it's frozen, and then they'll be able to inspect it and get information about what you did while you were using Tails. Therefore, when you actually click on shutdown or disconnect the USB device, Tails will perform a secure shutdown in which it'll wipe the RAM before it completely shuts down. Therefore, if someone gets your computer and freezes the RAM, there will still be no information about you because Tails completely and properly cleared the RAM before it went off, before it shut down. So this is a really cool feature to prevent cold boot attacks. So, as we know from the previous lectures, Tails is a live and an amnesic operating system. What we mean by this is it leaves no traces on the computer that it gets used on, and it does this by never using the internal storage. It runs completely from the RAM, which is securely wiped once you turn off or restart the computer. Then, when that computer boots, it will boot into its default operating system. This system will work exactly the same way that it was working before, and even if the whole computer gets inspected, there will be no traces of what you've done, and there will even be no traces of Tails being used on that computer. Now, this is a great feature that serves the main purpose of Tails, so it improves security because even if someone manages to hack into that computer and install malware or change the settings to compromise your privacy and anonymity, once you restart and boot into Tails, everything will be removed because nothing can be stored on that system. Not only that, but if you are dealing with sensitive files, you can do so without worrying about someone being able to recover these files because they will never be stored on the system. So these are great features that serve the main purpose of Tails, which is an operating system that is designed to improve our anonymity and privacy. But this feature is also a little bit inconvenient because, like we said, we cannot store anything on the system. So not only that we can't store files and passwords or keys, which is something that we might want to do, we also can't save any changes we make to any of the programs. For example, if you configure the mail client, or if you change the Tor settings, or even if you connect to a Wi-Fi network, all of these settings will be removed and forgotten once you restart or boot into Tails again. So every time you boot in Tails, you'll have to go and connect to the network that you always connect to. You'll have to go and change the Tor browser settings if you change them. If you set up a mail client, you'll have to go and set it up again, which can be a bit troublesome and take a bit of time. Now, the solution to this is to enable persistence on Tails. Persistence allows us to store files, passwords, keys, or program settings that we modify. It does this by encrypting whatever that's left on the USB flash drive, so it still doesn't use the internal storage. The internal storage will still remain untouched, and it will only rely on the space remaining on that USB stick. It will encrypt that space to improve its security. And then when you log in, you will have two options. You can log in with the live default option where nothing is stored, or you can unlock the persistent storage where you'll be able to store files in a specific directory, install programs, edit settings, and everything will be stored like any other operating system. So with this, you'll be able to store files, passwords, keys, like I said. You'll be able to modify settings. So if you connect to a network or if you log into a mail client, all of these settings will be stored. So when you log in again, you won't have to do them again. You'll also be able to install programs or browser plugins and so on. Now, the last two benefits are in red for a reason, because you need to be careful when you're doing these things. Because you need to keep in mind that Tools was made with security in mind, so all of the programs that come pre-installed in it are configured in a way to protect your anonymity and privacy. Therefore, when you modify these settings, or if you install more programs, these new programs or these modified settings might compromise your anonymity and privacy. So only install programs or modify settings if you know what you're doing. Not only that, but Tor and Tails work best when it is hard to distinguish between people that are using these systems. Therefore, when you modify settings or install extra programs, you're becoming more unique. Therefore, it would be easier to detect you because you're more distinguishable than other users, than the people that are using Tor and Tails with the default settings. So, with keeping all of this in mind, in the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to enable persistence on Tails. Okay, so now that we understand why Tails is non-persistent by default, why you might want to use persistence, and the warnings and the things that you want to keep in mind while using persistence, let's go ahead and see how to enable it and how to use it. So I have Tails right here, and to enable persistent storage, we're going to go to Applications, Tails, and we're going to click on Configure Persistent Volume. This will open the persistence wizard. It will give you a warning. Pretty much all the stuff that I mentioned in the previous lecture. It will also tell us how much of the memory stick will be used to create the persistent storage. So I have a 32 gigabyte USB flash drive. As you can see, only 20 of this will be used to create the persistent volume. It's also asking me for a passphrase. This is the passphrase that will be used to encrypt this storage. Make sure you pick something that is difficult to guess and difficult to brute force, but make sure it's also easy for you to remember. So I'm going to put my passphrase. I'm going to verify it in the second box. And once you're ready, you can click on Create to create the persistent storage. And once done, you will get a menu like this one right here, which will ask you to what exactly you want to save in this persistent volume. So by default, you can see personal data is set to on. And what this will do, it will actually create a directory that you'll be able to see here in places called persistent. And anything you store in this directory will be persistent and will not be removed when you restart or shut down Tails. So right now you can see I don't have it because persistence is not enabled. Once I restart, keeping this on, you'll see I'll have a new directory in here which I can use to store my files. Now, you can tick any of these as you wish. For example, if you want to store your bookmarks, you want to tick this. If you want to store the settings you set for your network connections, you want to tick this. So for example, if you connect to a Wi-Fi network, it will remember the password, because otherwise, with the installation that we have right now, the Wi-Fi settings are not stored. So you'll have to connect to the same network if you are connecting to the same network every time you boot into Tails. The additional software will not remove any software you install on Tails. Now you want to be careful about this because, like I said, if hackers install software on your installation, then that software will also be persistent. So make sure you only turn this on if you know what you're doing. You have other options, for example, for printers, for Thunderbird, which is a mail client, GNU-PG, the Electron Bitcoin wallet. And basically turning on persistence for any of these programs will store anything you do within these programs and store all the settings. So I'm actually going to turn it on for Electron because I might want to store some keys in this Bitcoin wallet and I wouldn't want them to be deleted. I'm gonna do the same with GNU-PG because again, I might have some passwords in here or keys that I don't want them to be deleted when I restart or boot into Tails again. I'll do this for Thunderbird as well. And for Pigeon, just in case I actually go ahead and modify the settings of any of these programs or store something in these programs, I don't want it to be deleted. I want it to be stored every time I boot into Tails. So like I said, go through these options, see which programs you might want to use, and turn them on accordingly. Now don't worry about these programs that I didn't really speak about. We will go through a lot of these programs as we go through the course, and you'll learn exactly what they can be used for. So once you're done with selecting the files and the settings that you don't want them to be removed or reset, click on Save, and that's it, we're done. Now, the persistent volume will not actually be active or usable until we restart Tails. So I'm gonna close this, and I'm gonna restart. And now, when you get to the welcome wizard of Tails, you'll see we have an extra option in here. So right now, we can put the passphrase here and unlock the persistent storage, or just click on Start Tails to start it normally without unlocking the storage, so it'll work exactly like we've seen in previous lectures with no persistence at all. So right now I actually want to unlock the persistent storage. So I'm going to put the passphrase that I created when I created the storage, and I'm going to click on unlock. As you can see, it's telling us that the storage is unlocked. And now if I start Tails, I should have access to this persistent storage and be able to store files in my persistent directory, and all the settings that I'm gonna change within the programs that I picked will still be stored even if I restart Tails. So if I go to Places now, you will see we have an extra directory called persistent, and anything we place in this directory will not be removed when we restart Tails. So let's try this. I'm gonna right click and create a new folder. And let's call this persistence test. So we have this new folder here, and I'm going to create a new folder on the desktop, and we'll call this test2. So when I restart Tails now, test2 should be removed because it's stored outside of the persistent storage, and persistent test in here should still be here. I'm just going to do this to help you understand how to use this persistent storage. So you can put any files that you don't want them to be removed in here, and then anything you store outside of this directory will be securely wiped every time you turn off Tails. I'm also going to go ahead and connect to a Wi-Fi network because remember, when I configured persistence, I chose to store the network settings. So any settings I make should be persistent and should not be reset when I restart Tails. So I'm going to go to my Wi-Fi settings, and I'm going to click on Select Network. I'm going to select my network and connect, put the password, connect. And as you can see, the icon is restored. It's telling me Tor is ready. And if I look in here, wire disconnected and Wi-Fi is connected to my network too. So now when I restart, the test in here, the test directory should be removed because it's outside of the persistent storage. The persistent test here should still be here because it's inside the persistent storage. And I should automatically connect to this network because I configured my network settings to be persistent. So this will go to show you that all of the programs that I turned on the persistent option to will store any settings or anything that I do in them. So let's go ahead and restart. Okay, so we're back at the login screen. Again, as usual, I'm going to put my password in here to unlock the persistent volume. Unlock. That's unlocked. Perfect. Now we're going to start it. And perfect. As you can see, first of all, we don't see the test directory that we created here. This is good because we created it outside of our persistent volume. Now let's go to Places and go to our persistent volume. And as you can see, we do have the persistent directory right here. This is perfect. This should still be here because we created this inside the persistent volume. So if you stored any other files in here, you'll always be able to see them when you start Tails. Let's go ahead and check if we automatically connected to our Wi-Fi network. And perfect, as you can see, it automatically connected. Like I said, without persistent, you would have had to connect to your target network every time you start Tails because the network settings won't be stored. This is just an example of all the other applications which we enabled persistent for. So right now I can use any of the other applications that I enabled persistence for, and anything I do on these applications will be stored even after I restart Tails. So this is perfect. Right now I have the best of both worlds. I can store files in a specific encrypted volume. I can also store some settings that I specifically chose, and everything else will be securely wiped every time I turn off the machine. Not only that, but I still have the option of using Tails with no persistence, exactly as we seen in previous lectures. All I have to do is, let me restart, and all I have to do is basically just start Tails without unlocking the persistent volume. So right here, all I have to do is literally ignore this and just click on Start Tails. And this will start it for me in the normal mode without mounting the persistent volume, so I won't even have access to the files stored in the persistent directory. So now even if I go to Places, I don't even have a directory called persistent. And just to confirm, if I go to my network settings, you'll see that it's detecting that I have a Wi-Fi adapter, but it's not automatically connecting to my network, even though that we can detect the network, because the network settings are not accessible because we started Tails without mounting the persistent volume. So right now we have an installation of Tails on a USB stick that we can use as an Amnesic live operating system where nothing gets stored once you shut it down. And if we wanted to, we can unlock the persistent volume, which will allow us to store files in a specific location. And it will also allow us to restore the settings for the programs that we enabled persistence for. And keep in mind, all of these settings and all of these files are stored in an encrypted volume that is encrypted with a passphrase that we pick ourselves. Now, if for any reason you wanted to delete the persistence storage, all you have to do is go to Applications again, to Tails, and click on Delete Persistent Volume. This will ask you if you really want to do this. I'm going to say yes, delete it for me, please. And that's it. Now it's deleted. So now if you restart, you won't even get the option to unlock the persistence volume because it is deleted. In the previous section, we learned how your internet service provider or your network admin could block you from accessing Tor. We also learned that we can use Tor bridges or pluggable transports to bypass this and access the Tor network. You might also want to use Tor bridges or pluggable transports even if you're not being blocked from using Tor, if you just want to hide the fact that you are using Tor. Because as I mentioned previously, when you use Tor, your internet service provider or your network admin or anyone who's intercepting connections, they'll be able to know that you're using Tor. They won't see the websites that you're accessing, but they will be able to know that you're using the Tor network. Therefore, if this is a problem, if this is something that you want to hide, then you might want to use Tor bridges or pluggable transports. Now, in the previous section, I showed you how to do this if you're using the Tor browser. But right now, we're not using the Tor browser anymore. we're using Tails, and like I said, Tails is configured to route all traffic through the Tor network, not only browsing traffic. Therefore, if you want to use a pluggable transport or a bridge, you need to configure the whole distribution to route all traffic through this pluggable transport or through this bridge. So, in this lecture, I'm not going to talk a lot about how bridges work and how they'd allow us to bypass censorship and use Tor even if it's blocked. I covered this in details previously, so if you don't remember that, please go back and revise that lecture. What I will cover here, though, is how to configure Tails to use bridges or pluggable transports. So, right now, I have Tails booted up right here. And as you can see, I am able to connect to the Tor network. So I already went to check.torproject.org and everything, as you can see, is working as expected. We can also see here the onion icon does not have an X. So it means that I'm properly connected to the Tor network. And if I click on this to open the Tor circuits, you'll see we'll get information about the Tor circuits right here. So everything is working as expected. But if this did not work for you, so if after loading Tails and after connecting to a network, you're still not able to connect to the Tor network, if you get an error, if the onion here has an X, then it is possible that your network administrator or your internet service provider is preventing you from accessing Tor. Or if you just want to hide the fact that you're using Tor, then we can configure Tails to use a pluggable transport or a bridge. To do this, we'll first need to restart the distribution because we already booted, and we need to actually tell it that I want to use a pluggable transport as soon as it starts. So here at this welcome message, you want to click on the plus here under the additional settings. And we want to click on the network connection. And I'm going to choose the second option in here, configure a Tor bridge or a local proxy. I'm going to click on add, and then I will start Tails. So give it its time to load up the operating system, and once it loads, it'll show you this window right here, which you can use to configure Tails to connect to the Tor network using a bridge or a proxy. Now, if you notice here on the top right, you can see there is an X beside the onion, meaning that we're still not connected to the Tor network. And if I go ahead now and run my browser, I won't even be able to access the internet. So I'm offline right now. So I'm going to click on configure to configure the network settings. And I'm going to check this option in here. Tor is censored in my country. And then I'm going to paste the bridges or the pluggable transports that I have in here. Now, I covered multiple methods on how you can get bridges and pluggable transports using emails or using different domains. So I'm not going to cover that here. If you don't remember how to get them, please go back and revise that lecture in the previous section. Right now, I actually have my pluggable transport that I want to use on a USB stick. So I'm going to connect that to Tails. And this will also be a good example for you to see how you can interact with the file system. So I'm just going to go to my home directory just to open the file browser. And we can see my removable disk right here. I'm going to click it. And I have my bridges in here in this text file. Bridges.txt. As usual, double click to open a normal text file. It'll open in the default text editor. I'm going to select everything and copy it. And then I'm going to go back to my configuration window and paste it here. So now we're done, and all I have to do is click on connect to connect using this pluggable transport. Just a quick option that I want to highlight in here as well is the proxy option. You can tick this box if you want to use a proxy. But right now, all I want to do is just use this pluggable transport, which I already pasted. So I'm just going to click on connect to use it. And right now, Tails is going to reconfigure my network settings so that all traffic within this operating system gets routed through this bridge, through this pluggable transport, and then through the Tor network. And as you can see right now, it's telling me that Tor is ready, and now we are connected to the internet through this bridge and through this pluggable transport. Again, you can see the X has disappeared here from the onion, which means that I am connected. And just to verify this, I'm gonna launch the Tor browser from applications, and we're gonna go to check.torproject.org. And perfect, as you can see, it's telling us that we are using the Tor network and our IP appears to be this IP right here. So everything is configured properly and we have internet access through the Tor network and through this pluggable transport. As I mentioned, this can be very helpful if your internet service provider or your admin is preventing you from accessing the Tor network, or if you don't want anyone to know that you're accessing the Tor network, if you want to hide the fact that you are using the Tor network. Now that we have Tails installed, configured with persistence, and we learned the basics on how to use it and interact with it, in this lecture, I want to talk about the Tor browser that comes with Tails and highlight a major restriction that Tails enforces over the Tor web browser. So, going to the applications, you can see we have in our favorites the Tor browser. As you know, we've actually covered this browser before and we spoke about how it works, and we learned how to install it on different operating systems and how to properly configure it for optimum security and anonymity. So what we have here is an identical version to the browser that I showed you before. You can go to check.torproject.org to make sure that everything is connected, but we already know that everything is working because, as I mentioned before, all connections sent from Tails, from the whole operating system, go through the Tor network, and we can confirm this from this onion. But if you really just want to double check, you can just go to check.torproject.org, and as you can see, it's telling us that everything is working, everything's configured properly, and we are using the Tor network. Now, as I showed you before, you can go to the onion icon in here to request a new identity, change security settings, or check for updates. You can check your Tor circuit from here, and you can also modify the options from here. Now, like I said, I spent multiple lectures explaining what the circuit is, what do we mean by a new identity and a new circuit, how to modify the security options for optimum security and anonymity. So I'm not gonna talk about that now. You can go ahead and do everything that I showed you previously because the steps to do it here are identical to the steps you'd follow with any Tor browser regardless of what operating system it's installed on. So I'm just gonna go and change my security settings and crank that to the safest, and we are good to go. I'm also gonna keep the screen at this size because, as I mentioned before, you don't want to use the screen in full screen because that'll give information about your monitor. Also, keeping it at the default size is always a good idea because that makes you less unique, and like I said, Tor and Tails work best by making it hard to distinguish the users that use these services. So when we keep the window at the default size, it's harder to distinguish between me and other users. What I want to cover though in this lecture is an extra feature that Tails implements, or an extra restriction that Tails applies to the Tor browser. To improve the security of the whole browser, so that it's more difficult to exploit and use to gain access to our system, Tails implement kernel-level restrictions over the Tor browser so that it cannot access any folder, any location within the file system except for one folder. Therefore, if we wanted to download something from the browser or upload something, we can only do that from one folder in our file system. So, if we look at the places here, you'll see we have a folder called Tor Browser, and we have a folder called Tor Browser Persistent because I enabled persistence on my installation. You will only see this if you enable persistence. And as the names suggest, the Tor browser folder is non-persistent, so anything you place in this folder will be deleted once you shut down or restart Tails. The persistent folder is persistent, so if you store anything in that folder, it will not be deleted when you restart or shut down Tails. Now, these two folders or directories are the only folders that the Tor browser has access to. So if, for example, you wanted to save this image, so you're going to go right click and save image as. I'm just giving this as an example, but this applies for anything that you want to save. You'll see we're automatically in Amnesia, which is the name of our user, Tor browser. So this is the path that we are in. And if we wanted to change this path to save this somewhere else, for example, if you click on desktop, you'll see we'll get an error message saying permission denied. You'll get this error message if you click on any other directory in your computer except the Tor browser directories, the Tor browser normal and the Tor browser persistent. So let's store this, for example, in the Tor browser in here, and it's just going to be called Tor on PNG. I'm going to save it. And now if I go to places, Tor browser, you'll see we have the image here. So it's just like any other directory. The only thing is this is the only directory that is visible to the Tor browser. So the same thing applies if you wanted to upload a file and send it anywhere. You won't be able to upload any files unless they are stored in Tor browser or in the Tor browser persistent. So if you had something on desktop or in music or in the documents, you'll have to first copy it to one of these directories, either to Tor browser or Tor browser persistent, and then upload it from there. So if I just go to tinyupload.com, this is a file sharing service. It's by no means anonymous or private. I'm just using it as an example to show you how the browser only have access to specific directories. So if I click on browse to select the file that I want to upload, again, you can see by default, I'm in the Tor browser directory, which I can upload files from with no problems. But if I try to go to my documents, again, I'll get the same error. Downloads or any other directory, I'll always be getting this error. Therefore, if you want to upload something, you'll have to copy it, paste it in your Tor browser or your Tor browser persistent if you have one, if you enabled persistence. And then from here, you can just select it, open it, and it'll upload just like any other operating system. Now, like I said, this is not a private or an anonymous way of uploading files. I will show you a better way later on in the course. So that's it for this lecture. We've already used the Tor browser and we are already a little bit familiar with it. I just wanted to highlight the restriction that Tails enforces on the Tor browser. And in the next lecture, I'm going to introduce you to the insecure browser that comes with Tails. Previously, we learned how to install and use the Tor browser, and in the previous lecture, I showed you how to use it with Tails. Now, this will be the browser that we'll use most of the time to protect our anonymity and privacy and to access the hidden services or the darknet websites. In this lecture, though, I want to show you another browser that comes with Tails, which is the insecure or unsafe browser. Now you might think, why would I want to use an insecure or unsafe browser? See, as we mentioned before, unlike installing the Tor browser on other operating systems such as Windows, OS X or Linux, where only traffic going through the Tor browser will go through the Tor network and all other traffic will literally go directly to the internet, on Tails, all traffic is forced to go through the Tor network. So regardless of what application generates this traffic, even if it's a system update, even if it's some malware that got downloaded and got executed on your system, it will always be forced to go through the Tor network. Now, like we said, this is great because it prevents leaks, it improves our security and anonymity because no other programs can access the internet directly. Therefore, all of our connections are always going through the Tor network. So this is really, really good and an amazing feature of Tails. The only problem is sometimes you actually need to access the internet directly, or you need a browser that will not use the Tor network. For example, if you're trying to connect to a captive portal. What I mean by a captive portal is a network similar to the networks you see in airports, universities, or coffee shops, where once you connect, you have to log in or you have to authenticate. Now, usually the authentication is done using a web browser. Any web browser will work, but the Tor browser will not work because, as we know, Tor browser will route traffic through the Tor network, and therefore you won't be able to authenticate with the local network. Now, if you were running the Tor browser from a normal operating system like Linux, Windows, or OS X, the solution to this is easy. You just go to one of your other browsers, and like I said, these will be accessing the internet directly, so that will be fine. The problem is, as we mentioned, in Tails, everything is forced to go through the Tor network. So even if you had another web browser, it'll be forced to go through the Tor network, and therefore you still won't be able to authenticate with these networks. Therefore, for this reason, and for any other rare cases where you would actually need to access the internet directly, Tails comes with another web browser. It's actually called the Unsafe browser, because this is the only application on the operating system that can make direct connection to the internet outside of the Tor network. So you want to be very, very careful when you're using this, and you want to make sure that you know what you're doing, because it is not using the Tor network. It's going to be accessing the internet directly, revealing your location, your IP, and so on. So right here, I'm back at Tails. And if I go to my Wi-Fi networks and look for a Wi-Fi network, you can see that there is a Starbucks Wi-Fi around me. So this is a coffee shop network, and this is an example of a network that uses a captive portal. Like I said, these networks are commonly used in coffee shops, colleges, hotels, or airports. So it's all the same scenario. Once you connect, so I'm going to click on it and connect, you'll see that I will be able to connect to the network, but I won't have internet access. So if I go up here, you can see that I am connected to the network, but as you can see, the Tor icon right here still has an X beside it, so I'm not able to connect to the Tor network. And even if I go and run my Tor browser, as you can see, it's telling me that the Tor network is not ready yet. So the browser will probably not be able to access the internet. And even if you wait for this, it's not going to connect. So I'm going to click on Start anyway. And as you can see, nothing will load. We'll be stuck at the welcome page. And even if you try to go to any website, it's not gonna load because the captive portal needs you to first authenticate with it. So this network is configured in a way that the users have to authenticate using a web interface first. See, usually on normal operating systems, when you launch your browser, you'll see the authentication web interface, the authentication page by default. But because Tails is configured so that it routes all traffic through the Tor network, the web interface or the authentication page is inaccessible to us. Therefore, the only way around this is to go ahead and use the insecure browser which accesses the internet directly. To do this, we're going to go to Applications, Internet, and we're going to click on the Unsafe browser. It's going to show us a warning telling us that this will access the internet directly. You will not be anonymous, so be careful. I've explained all this to you, so we're going to click on Launch. And as you can see, we get another web browser with a big warning again about the implications of using this browser. But we know what we're doing, so that's fine. And now you can use this browser similar to the way that you use any web browser on any other operating system that does not force traffic through the Tor network. So you probably already connected to such networks in hotels or airports. Once you connect to it, you open your web browser and you can go to any website you want. For example, I'm going to go to duckduckgo.com. And as you can see, the website that I want will not load, but I will get the page for the captive portal. Now, some captive portals will ask you for a name and email. They might ask for your phone number. You can fill this with any information you want. You don't have to give valid information. And once you do this, you can click on connect. In my case, I can just connect without filling any information. And as you can see, I'll get redirected to the Starbucks website. So I got authenticated with the network with the captive portal now. So now Tails should be able to establish a connection with the Tor network, and the Tor browser should work for us as well. And perfect, as you can see, we get a notification telling us now we can access the internet. On the top right, the X has disappeared. So if I go to check.torproject.org, as you can see, we get a nice message telling us that we are connected properly to the Tor network, our IP is changed, and everything is working as expected. So now we don't need the unsafe browser anymore. We can close it because we have authenticated with the target network properly, and the network is going to allow us to access the internet, and then Tails is going to force all traffic through the Tor network, which is exactly what we want, which will improve our privacy and anonymity. In the previous section, we learned what is a VPN, its benefits, and how to connect to it before connecting to the Tor network. This was very easy, as all we had to do is download the client that's compatible with our operating system. Most VPN providers offer a Linux client, and Tails is a Linux distro. Unfortunately though, normal Linux clients will not work with Tails because of the restrictions that Tails apply on the network connections. Therefore, connecting to a VPN from Tails can be a bit tricky, and that's why I want to spend this lecture and the next lecture showing you how to connect to a VPN from Tails. Now keep in mind, you don't have to use a VPN with Tails. This is an optional step, and there is a big debate whether you should use a VPN or not with Tails. Because as we know, Tails automatically forces all traffic to go through Tor, so by default, it is more anonymous and more private than normal operating systems. So skip this lecture and the next lecture if you don't want to use a VPN, and only watch it if you actually do want to use a VPN with Tails. Now, just a quick recap. As we learned before, usually when you access a server or anything on the internet, you send the request directly to that server. When you use a VPN, you create an encrypted tunnel to the VPN server. So if you're trying to go to google.com, only the VPN knows that you're going to google.com. The traffic between you and the VPN will be fully encrypted, so it's useless to anybody that intercepts it. And then once the VPN gets the request, it'll forward it to the actual server that you need to go to, for example, google.com. Now, this doesn't have to be google.com. It can be any website or any server or on the internet. Or you can even send that request to the Tor network and access a darknet or a hidden service within the network, or go to the internet after that, again improving your privacy and anonymity. Now, because of the way the data is sent in here in an encrypted manner, this adds an extra layer of encryption. Therefore, it improves your privacy and anonymity. If your data gets intercepted by hackers or by your network admin or by your internet service provider, it'll be gibberish, it'll be useless, so they won't be able to stop you or prevent you from accessing websites, and they won't be able to gather information about you. So it'll allow you to bypass censorship, protect you from hackers, and so on. Now, if you want to go over this in more details, please revise my lecture on VPN in the previous section. This is just a quick recap. Like I said, in that lecture, we connected to a VPN easily using a client that is made for our operating system. The problem that we have now is the fact that we are using Tails, because most VPN providers do not support Tails. So, going back to how Tails work, as we know, it forces all traffic from our computer to go through the Tor network. So if we have a VPN provider, even if we have a proper subscription with them and we try to connect to them, we won't be able to connect to it because the operating system is forcing all traffic to go through the Tor network. Therefore, we need to first configure the firewall in Tails to redirect all data to the VPN provider instead of redirecting it to the Tor network. So we'll configure it to redirect all data through the VPN provider, and then from the VPN provider, data is going to go to the Tor network. It'll bounce over the 3 nodes and either access a hidden service within the Tor network or go to a website on the internet. Now, if your VPN provider has a Tails client, then you will not need to manually do this. The client will do everything for you. The only problem is most VPN providers do not support Tails, so you'll have to do a bit of research to find the ones that support it. As you may already know, we actually have our own VPN service, ZSVPN, and we support Tails. So let me show you how the client would work just as an example. So all you have to do is literally download it from the downloads page in here. I'll actually include a link to this in the resources in case you want to get more information. All you will need to do is simply download the client. And as you can see, I already have it downloaded in here in my persistent downloads. It's called ZSVPN. And I'm just going to run it like so, // followed by the file name. It's going to ask me what do I want to do. I'm going to say I want to connect. It'll ask me for the username and the password. Then it'll list all the servers available to me. So all I have to do right now is select the server that I want to connect to. For example, let's say I wanted to connect to Mexico 189. So I'm just going to type 189, hit enter. As you can see, it'll automatically configure the VPN settings. It'll automatically configure the firewall. So I'm just going to put my password now, the system password, the root password. And again, it'll automatically download OpenVPN if it's not downloaded, and it'll connect to the server that I selected. So as you can see right here, it's saying that I'm connected to Mexico. And that's it. Now we're ready to go and browse the internet. To confirm this, I'm going to go and run my Tor browser. And I'm just going to go to check.torproject.org. And perfect. As you can see, it's telling us that my browser right now is configured to use the Tor browser. So right now what's happening is we're connecting to the VPN first, and then our traffic is routed to the Tor network. And then, like I said, we can bounce through 3 nodes and then go to the internet or stay within the Tor network and access Onion hidden services. Now, going back to the client, you can put number 1 if you want to connect again, number 2 to disconnect, 3 to reset the firewall settings so you're directly connected to Tor and you're not using the VPN, and 4 to simply quit the client. So as you can see, it's very easy if your VPN provider supports Tails. If your VPN provider does not support Tails, then you'll have to manually modify the firewall settings so that it allows you to connect to the VPN and manually use the VPN settings to connect to the VPN server. This is a little bit technical and requires a little bit of Linux knowledge, but don't worry about it. I will walk you through it step by step in the next lecture. Previously, we've seen how easy it is to connect to a VPN server if the provider offers a VPN client. As I said earlier, most VPN providers do not support Tails. Therefore, if you want to connect to a VPN from Tails and your provider does not support Tails, you'll have to manually modify the firewall settings, install the needed software, and connect to the VPN server that you want to connect to. So in this lecture, I'm going to show you how to do that so that you can connect to any VPN server from Tails. Please keep in mind, like I said earlier, connecting to a VPN from Tails is optional. This is not a required step because, as we know, Tails automatically forces all traffic to go through the Tor network. Therefore, by default, it is more private and more anonymous than most operating systems. So the main thing that I'm actually going to be showing you in this lecture is how to configure Tails so that it redirects data to our VPN provider and then connect to this VPN provider. So let's go to Tails. As you can see here, I haven't even logged in yet. Before doing that, you need to add an admin account. So I showed you how to do that before. We're going to click on the plus and we're going to click on the administrator password, and we're just going to set an admin password so that we can execute commands with admin privileges. We're going to click on add to add it, and then we're going to start Tails. Now, once you're inside Tails, I'm going to go and start my terminal. So we're going to go to applications and run the terminal from here. This is basically a program that allows us to execute commands on the system. I know it sounds a little bit scary, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. And the first thing I want to do is change my privileges to admin privileges, because I'm going to be modifying the system settings and I'm going to be installing additional software. Therefore, I need to be admin for this. So to change our permissions to admin, we're going to do sudo su. It's going to ask you for the admin password. So I'm going to put the password that I just set at the start of the video. Now, if you notice, at the start, it was saying Amnesia, which is the user that we were using, at Amnesia. But now it's saying root at Amnesia, meaning that we're going to be executing commands as root. Root is the admin user account on the system. So I'm going to clear the screen, and the first command that I want to run is a command to install OpenVPN. OpenVPN is a program that we're going to use in order to connect to our VPN server. Regardless of what VPN provider you're using, whether you're using Nord or any other VPN provider, it doesn't really matter. You can use OpenVPN with all of them. So the first thing that we need to do is install this program on Tails. And to do that, all we have to do is do apt-get. This is the program in Tails that we can use to install other programs. And what we want to do is install. And the program that we want to install is called OpenVPN. So apt-get is a program that we use to install other programs. Install is what we want to do. We want to install another program, and the program that we want to install is called OpenVPN. I'm going to hit enter. And this is telling me, do I really want to do this? I'm going to say yes. So I'm going to type Y from my keyboard and hit enter. And perfect. Now OpenVPN is installed, as you can see in here. Now you can see the notification that we have right now. It's asking us if I want to install this program only once or install every time. If you click on install every time, Tails will install this program every time you start Tails, because as we know, Tails is amnesic. So if you pick install only once, it'll only be installed for the session. If you restart the computer, it'll be removed. So I'm going to click on install every time, and this way, every time I start Tails, it'll automatically install OpenVPN for me, and I'll be able to use it without doing the apt-get command that we just did. So now that we have OpenVPN installed, we're actually ready to go and connect to our VPN. But before doing that, you need to go ahead and download the configuration files of your VPN. Now you need to get these from your VPN provider. Most VPN providers will give you that. The process of doing that is different. You might even need to communicate with them. But right now, I already have them downloaded in my Tor browser persistent directory in here. These are the configuration files that I need for my VPN provider to connect using OpenVPN. The main file, which is the config file, is the file with the .ovpn extension. If I double click this file, you'll see the OpenVPN configurations. And all you need to do is basically run OpenVPN, the program that we just installed, and tell it to use the configuration in this config file. This will work on any system. You can even do it from Windows or Linux. But it won't work from Tails because, like I said earlier, Tails is configured to force all traffic through the Tor network. So before doing that, before trying to connect to our VPN, we need to modify the firewall settings so that all data is forced to go through the VPN first and then go to the Tor network. So to do that, I'm going to open the configuration file for the firewall. So I'm going to go back to my terminal and I'm going to do gedit. Gedit is a text editor, so I'm basically saying I want to use a text editor to open a text file, and the text file that I want to open is the text file that controls the firewall in Tails. So that text file is stored in etc firm, and the name of the text file is firm.conf. So we're doing gedit because that's the text editor that we want to use, and we're telling it we want to edit the following file. If I hit enter, this will open the file for me, as you can see in here. And what we want to do, like I said, we want to add an exception for the VPN server that we want to connect to. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look for where it says whitelist access to local resources. And in here, we're going to add the information of the server that we want to connect to. We can get this information from here, from the config file. Like I said, this is the file with the .ovpn extension. So the first thing we're going to do is type daddr to specify the IP of the VPN server that we want to connect to. And we can get that from the config file. It's after the remote in here. So we have it right here. I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. Then we're going to need to specify the protocol. So I'm going to type proto followed by the protocol. Again, looking at the config file, we can see the proto is UDP. So again, we're just going to type UDP in here. Then we need to specify the port. So we're going to type dport. Again, we're going to get that from the config file, from the remote entry. So the remote contains the IP followed by the port. So we can see the port here. It's 1191. Again, we go back here. 1191. And we're going to say for this specific IP, with this specific protocol, with this port, I want you to allow the admin user, the root user, to do anything. So we're going to open two curly brackets and we're going to say mod owner. The UID of the owner is root. Like I said, root is the admin in Linux. And we're going to say we want to accept all connections that this user does to this specific IP with this specific protocol with this specific port. The next thing that we need to do is redirect and force all traffic to go through this VPN server so that anything that the operating system does will have to flow this way, and that way it is very difficult for other programs to access the internet directly and therefore leak information about our real IP and real identity. So to do that, we're going to scroll down to where it says Tor is allowed to do anything it wants to do. We're going to say this can only be valid if the outer face, so the interface in which data flows through, is TUN0. Now, TUN0 is a virtual interface that doesn't exist right now. It will be created once we connect to the VPN server. And what we're doing right now in here is forcing all traffic to go through this interface that will be creating the encrypted tunnel between our computer and the VPN server. So that's it right now. First of all, we added a rule to allow Tails to connect to the VPN server. And second, we configured the firewall to force all traffic to go through the connection of this VPN server. So I'm going to do Control S to save this. And we're going to do Control Q to quit the file. We're also done with the config. So I'm going to close it in here. And I'm going to clear my screen. And right now, we just have to do one more thing before connecting to the VPN server, which is restarting our firewall for these changes to take effect. To do that, we're going to do etc init config.d firm, which is the name of my firewall, and we're gonna say I want to restart this firewall. We're gonna hit enter, and if you fail at this stage, it means that you misconfigured one of the rules. So please just revise the video and make sure you set up the rules exactly like I did. As you can see, I was able to restart it with no issues at all. Therefore, right now, I am ready to go ahead and connect to my VPN server. Now, before doing that, let me just show you right here. As you can see, the configuration files are stored in my home persistent Tor browser. So I need to navigate to this location before being able to use these files. So we're going to use the cd command to change my current working directory to this directory. So we're going to do cd followed by persistent. And you can use the tab to autocomplete. For example, I'm just going to type TOR and press tab to autocomplete Tor browser. If I hit enter, you'll see that I am inside the correct path right now, same path as you see in here. Therefore, right now I can go ahead and use this file to connect to my VPN server. So we're going to use the program OpenVPN that we installed at the start of the video. So we're going to do OpenVPN --config to specify the config file. And again, as you can see in my case, the config file right here is called config.ovpn. In your case, it might be called something else, but the config file is always the file that ends with .ovpn. So I'm going to type config.ovpn. And before I hit enter, just going to go over the command. We're using OpenVPN. This is the program that will allow us to connect to our VPN server. We're doing --config to specify the config file. And my config file is called config.ovpn. I'm going to hit enter. And as you can see, it's going to ask me for the password. This is your password to connect to your VPN server, not the password of the system. So I'm going to input mine right now, hit enter, and perfect. If you see initialization sequence completed, this means that the connection has been established. Now you will also notice that the onion icon in here will have an X as if you're not connected to anything. Don't worry about this. You're seeing that because right now the traffic is forced to go through the VPN server, like I said, and that's why the system thinks that it's not connected, but it is actually connected to the VPN server. To confirm this, I'm going to go and run my Tor browser. And I'm just going to go to check.torproject.org. And perfect, as you can see, it's telling us that my browser right now is configured to use the Tor browser. So right now what's happening is we're connecting to the VPN first, and then our traffic is routed to the Tor network. And then, like I said, we can bounce through 3 nodes and then go to the internet or stay within the Tor network and access Onion hidden services. Now, just to make sure that this is the way our computer is set up and it can't access the Tor network directly or the internet directly, what I'm going to do in here, I'm just going to go back to my terminal window and I'm going to press Ctrl and C to quit the running program right here. And now if I go back to my Tor browser and refresh the page, you will see that I do not have connection. And that is perfect because what I just did right now, I disconnected from the VPN server. And because I did that, I can't access anything. And this is exactly what we want. We want our computer to be configured in a way that it forces all traffic through the VPN server. If you want to go back to the previous configuration where traffic is forced through the Tor network directly, all you have to do is simply restart Tails. Tails is amnesic. All of these configurations will disappear and you will be connecting to the Tor network directly as usual. Now this could be a feature and can be something annoying if you always want to connect to a VPN, because every time you restart Tails, you will have to do this. You will have to do all of the steps that I showed you previously in order to connect to your VPN provider, because your settings will be reset every time you restart.